Well, I'm Chris Bryant, lead pastor here. Thanks again for joining us in worship today. It's great to see each and every one of you. I appreciate you being here. Never take your attendance for granted. Thanks for joining us in worship today. It's been a great day in worship so far, and I trust that you've already begun to feel the Spirit among you. Selfishly, one of those praise songs, I didn't request it, but it was just very dear to me, and it's amazing how sometimes a particular praise song can just take you back to a very special place in your life or in your memory. Anyway, I'm in a great place today because of that, and I'm grateful for it. Today, our Get in the Game theme continues with a message on success through persistence. That's what I want to talk to you about today. Success through persistence. Now, at the start of the sermon last week, I talked about a number of different sports in the fall, from cross country to NASCAR, the different connections in sports, and quoted a very famous football player, quoted a famous soccer player and coach, quoted a famous volleyball player, and ended the sermon with, I think, was a pretty good story. Many people talked about it. It's a true story. It happened back in 2008 about a football game. I say all that to say today, our sports theme is going to be much more narrowly focused on baseball and softball, okay? Because baseball and softball hit a home run. So, no, come on, I wanted, that's what I want. Like in traditional, everyone went, I know it was good for my soul. I'll try it. So baseball and football hit home runs. Yeah, see, that's great. We're into it. That's part of worship in church. You participate and there's good times and you laugh at the stupid jokes of the preacher. It's all part of the faith, But in all seriousness, baseball and softball have a lot to teach us about success through persistence. Baseball and softball are games of failure. They're games of failure. I want to talk to you about that today. Now, if we're going to talk about baseball, though, you can't preach a sermon about baseball without quoting the famous Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, if you don't know who this guy is, first of all, you probably know him without knowing him if you don't. And I'll say that in a moment. But Yogi was the famous catcher, number 8 for the New York Yankees. In the 1950s, went to 7 World Series, 5 of which were in a row. And he's got great pithy kind of sayings, one of which is this. I think it's great wisdom. Love is the most important thing in the world, but baseball's pretty good too. Now, whether you might have heard or know Yogi without knowing him through the expression, it's not over till, that's Yogi Berra, right? That's him. So if you ever said that or heard it, you're quoting Yogi Berra. Yogi has great pithy sayings. Again, a little rabbit trail this morning. My favorite thing that Yogi said is, I didn't actually say everything I said. I didn't actually say everything I said. That's a great thing for a preacher to quote, I think, right? But it's in reference to Yogi referring to people who are quoting him that are actually not things that he said, but they're attributing them to him. And so, but the way Yogi says it's better, I didn't actually say everything I said. It's great. Now, Yogi's manager during those famed years in the 1950s when, again, the Yankees won 7 World Series. They went to the World Series like 9 times in that decade. And 5 of which were in a row. The manager was a guy by the name of Casey Stengel, and he himself was a famous baseball player, but then he became a famous manager in part because of these pithy sayings that he came up with, and he had kind of a tendency to ramble, but amusingly. And one of the things that you've probably heard him say, or him quoted as, is this. There's 3 things that can happen in baseball. You can win, you can lose, or it can rain. Right? That's the 3 things that can happen in baseball. And it makes me think of a scene from Bull Durham where this quote is actually used, and they add, I think the expression, or you don't have tickets to see the game, or something like that. But in Bull Durham, the Kevin Costner plays a character where he's a veteran, a minor league veteran, and is telling all the young guys that if they want a day off, he can get them a rain out. And they're like, come on, old guy, what can you do, right? And he bets some money. And of course, in the middle of the night, he takes him to the field. He knows where all the sprinklers are on, turns all the sprinklers on, gushing water everywhere. And he says, looky there, it's a catastrophe, right? And they get the day off. Kevin Costner stars in a lot of great movies, baseball movies, that is. But there's a lot of baseball movies to star in. What's your favorite baseball movie? There's so many. Is a favorite baseball movie of yours one of those that is based on actual history, a historical event like A League of Their Own? It's a great movie, right? Or I like Moneyball, right? That was a great based on a true story. Or 42, about Jackie Robinson, right? Or maybe your favorite baseball movie is more the fictional kind, the comic relief kind. You're into Major League, boy, that's the movie you like, Major League, or the Bad News Bears, or maybe you like the more inspirational kinds of baseball movies, like Field of Dreams, this sort of thing. Or maybe you're into those baseball movies that are just as much about life as they are about baseball. Robert Redford did a movie in the 80s called The Natural. You know that? Some of you know that, maybe? Or a more recent one is with Justin Timberlake and Amy Adams and Clint Eastwood, Trouble with the Curve. That was about relationships and life and all kinds, but it's a great movie. So anyway, my point is Hollywood seems to know something that we need to know this morning. And that there's something about this game, this particular sport, that makes for a good story. It's easy to compare with life. There's something about it that carries kind of an innate narrative that all of us can relate to. I personally think that has to do with baseball, softball being games of failure. That there's a lot of failing innate built in to the sport itself. Now, I think everybody kind of has sort of an understanding of this when you talk about, people getting hits and knowing that, big leaguers, it doesn't take a lot to have a big league average. It's kind of a small fraction of the number of times they go up to bat. But I really gained an appreciation for this about 12 to 13 years ago. I had a guy in my congregation who was a really good baseball player himself. And then he went on to coach baseball and girls softball in various formats and leagues and teams. And it seemed like no matter what this guy did, whoever he coached, they were always in the championship contention every year. And I was in a conversation with him one day about kind of his coaching method and his style. And he pops off and he says, well, Chris, softball is just like baseball. It's a game of failure. And the way he said it, it struck me. Like I said, I kind of had a understanding or sort of before, but I didn't have an appreciation because what he was saying, and ultimately he explained it more to me, is that, while all sports can have failing to it, baseball and softball, it's not that it just has more opportunities to fail. He meant that the very premise of the game, the foundational understanding of the game is failure. Or to put it a different way, winners, successful baseball players, successful softball players, successful baseball, softball teams are the ones in which it's not that they avoid failure, it's that they navigate failure well. They navigate failure well, both as individuals, but then even more importantly, collectively as a team. They navigate expected failure well. I think we can learn from this today. Again, I don't know that we have an appreciation for this. We have the general idea that, the batting average sort of thing, and to put it in very specific terms, if a professional league baseball player goes to bat 200 times and gets a hit 70 of those times, and, there's some qualification over what an at-bat actually is, but setting that aside, 70 out of 200, that's a batting average of 350. And that's a really good batting average. But think about this, what teacher, what parent is going to be excited about little Johnny or little Sally Sue coming home and saying, look, a 35. Isn't this great? It's a 35, right? I mean, it's a game of failure. Or better said, it's a game that requires you to navigate failure well. It's the only sport that puts errors in lights right next to the points earned or runs earned, right? Right next to it, as just as important as the actual points or runs, errors. Isn't that interesting? It's a game where, again, in the professional league, a starting pitcher, if you're credited a win as a starting pitcher, even 20% of the time, it's pretty good. There were pitchers in the major leagues last year that only got 4 or 5 wins out of 50 plus games. I mean, now again, there's a lot to qualify what gives you a win, okay? There's a lot to it. But even still, setting that aside, just think of the frustration. These are professional athletes. They're really good at what they do, right? And how hard they work. And to see such little success, I mean, what kind of person do they have to be to handle that? Baseball and softball is a game where you look at even some of the most famous people, just like we just quoted, talked about with Casey Stengel or Yogi Berra. Their careers as managers, their win-loss, barely over 50%. And these are legends of the game. Well, will Yogi win today? Will Casey win today? 50-50. Isn't that something? Similarly, it's a game, even when you end up winning more games than usual, that doesn't necessarily make you or lean towards you becoming a champion. Not to bring up old injuries, but the Braves last year won 103 games. 103 out of 162. That's a lot of games. Anytime you reach 100, it's a big deal, although more teams are doing it nowadays. But still, 103 games, and they didn't make it past the divisional round. It's a game of failure. Again, Yogi and Casey, legendary baseball players and managers in those impressive years back in the 1950s with the Yankees, they won 7 World Series, went to the World Series like 9 times. The one year that they won the most games was a year they didn't make it to the World Series. Isn't it something? Failing even when you win. Now, I'm not a huge baseball guy. I played baseball as a kid. Growing up, and then in my 20s and 30s, I played a lot of recreational softball in different groups and teams. And of course, like anybody else, I like going to the Braves Stadium every now and then, watching a game. That's a lot of fun. But what I did get from my conversation with this person in my church a dozen years back is a greater appreciation for what this particular game, baseball, softball, can do in helping us navigate or learn about failure, or even deciding that failure isn't failure, it's something else. It can teach us a lot about life and faith, specifically how success is ultimately found, not by avoiding necessarily failure, but by navigating expected failure, by handling it well, and not just by ourselves. Handling the expected failure well with others. That's a lot. That's some good stuff there. Because, on successful softball teams, on successful baseball teams, part of what makes them successful is everybody responds to everybody else by understanding we each got to do our own part, and part of our own part is all of us moving on when bad things happen. All of us moving on when somebody messes up. All of us moving on in any moment that is disappointing, that it didn't reach its potential, all in the effort of what the next moment could be. Being always ready for the next moment, letting it go, because expecting that things are not going to work out is normal. And so you just got to keep going. Don't let it stop you. Don't let it discourage you. What a healthy way to approach life and spirituality. Because all of us want life to be good. And to be clear, all of us want life to be good all the time. Everybody does, right? Who wouldn't? But it also kind of puts us in a bit of a delusion, because the truth is a lot of life isn't necessarily good. And maybe it's not necessarily all that bad either, but often it's not what we want. And while it may not be awful, of course, sometimes it is awful, but even if it's not awful, there's just a lot of days of mediocre at best. And some of us fight depression because of that. Because somewhere in the inside of us, we're hardwired to think that shouldn't be. Life should be better. Work should be better. The marriage should be better. Relationships should be better. The kids should be better. Our health should be better. And the thing about it is, there's nothing wrong with improvement. There's nothing wrong with improvement, but what I'm talking about is a sort of kind of an emotional hostage taking of ourselves, where we can't even enjoy those good moments because we're just constantly swirling around the mediocre or what we think is bad because it didn't live up to our expectations. What if we could turn that around? What if instead we chose to think that any day, every single day, what if we woke up not with, hey, everything's going to be great today, but we kind of thought, you know what, there's going to be a lot of disappointments today. Because that's life. But that's okay. There's probably going to be a moment or two that are really, really good. I wonder how that would change us and move us from the failures and disappointments that drag us down to begin to see things entirely differently. Maybe because of our trust and faith in God, that we wouldn't let those things trouble us as much. I wonder how just doing that might change our perspective about everything, or how any one part of our life is doing. We read these promises in Scripture from Joshua. Have I not commanded you? God speaking to us, the Lord saying to us, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. The psalmist speaks on our behalf, all of us, saying, my flesh and my heart may fail. Right? The expectation is there's going to be a lot of failings, literal failings, emotional failings. There's going to be a lot of disappointments, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. You know, successful softball players, successful baseball players are people with incredibly even keel attitudes. They are people who learn, or who naturally are born that way, I'm not sure which, or a combination of both, to stop looking at failure as failure. They see instead opportunity, the moment, the now. They are some of the best athletes in the world to not dwell on the past. They also tend to not get too hung up about worrying about the future. They understand you play the game one moment at a time, one play at a time. And this is really important. Not only do you play one moment at a time and one play at a time, they know that you really don't know until the end of the game which moments actually ended up being the ones that mattered the most. That's really important. They don't spend a lot of time evaluating in the moment of, oh, this is really big, or oh, this is really terrible. They know that you got to wait till the end of the game to figure out which moments actually mattered the most. So what do? Well, you just keep playing. You keep going. That's what's important. Keep going. A softball player may go 0-3 at her attempts at bat, but it's her fourth time up that she makes the difference. Maybe she makes a double play in the second inning, but then misses an easy out in the fourth. What matters? What matters is the fifth inning. What happens next? Maybe you're in a slump, or maybe you're in a streak, but it doesn't matter because your teammates all around you are still counting on you, because at any given time, whether you're in a slump or a streak, it doesn't matter. Any moment could be the one that you're counted upon, and in fact, the time where you make the difference. It becomes the moment that ultimately does win the game. So just keep going. Keep playing. Keep going. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. The Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. My flesh, my heart may fail, but God is my strength, the strength of my heart, my portion forever. A friend of mine has reminded me periodically that God says to us, don't be afraid, because there are times when we are. God speaks to us, have courage, because there will be times when we feel timid and weak in the knees and our stomach is doing somersaults. God promises us, I will be with you wherever you go, because there are going to be places and times in our life where we wonder, where is God at all? And I love that the psalmist confesses that that's our disposition, that our flesh, our bodies, that our heart, our emotions, our mental capacities, all these things may fail. We may find ourselves in a terribly dark and lonely place, and yet God can still be our strength and our portion, our inheritance and our reward, because it is for such times as those that God has said to us, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. I'm with you. So keep going. Keep playing. Keep going. Keep going. Now, we also need to remember that we can't do this alone. I've been told by that same guy that I referred to at the beginning of the sermon, as well as a friend of mine who was a long-time associate pastor and working with me in ministry. He was a big baseball guy, and he coached too. And he would talk to me about how the hardest part of coaching a baseball team or a softball team is getting the big hitters, the power hitters, to understand what we're trying to do. He said, because those ladies, those guys that are the big hitters, boy, they can knock that ball over the fence, but yet they also strike out a lot. And if they don't understand that it's not about getting home runs, you're ultimately, this is what I learned, the team won't win the game. Because what really matters, as flashy as home runs are, and we love them, I mean, if it happens, great. But what really matters is just getting on base. That's what they told me. He said, that's what, teams that win, they get that. Everybody knows what really matters, just get on base. And you can get on base by making a hit. You can get on base by taking a walk, right? Getting a walk or reaching on an error. It's simple as that. Get on base. That's your job. And then this guy that talked to me years ago, he said this. It was so great. He said, and then it's the team's job to get you home. Isn't that something? Your job is to get on base, but it's the team's job to get you home. Now, I think we need to hear this because it's interesting, this parallel between faith and being on God's team, the church, and is, in baseball, softball, they're on a team, but the action happens one player at a time. It's not like there's different people involved, but you follow where the ball is, And I think for us as Christians, like we understand that we're on a team, like God's team, the church, but kind of the action, at least from our perspective, happens one player at a time. Like we're in every play. And so I think sometimes we forget that we're on a team. And we end up trying to be that big league hitter. We trying to be the power hitter where, it's like, man, if I'm going to win this deal, I gotta hit home runs. I gotta hit home runs. And we strike out a lot. And it's hard. We forget that there's a team. There's a team we're supposed to be on. And all we really need is just get on base. Just get on base. The team will get us home. It's an important lesson for us to learn because life is full of problems and errors and failure, and so many of us feel down so much of the time. We forget that God calls us to be part of a team, that part of how life is engineered to be successful, that part of our spirituality, for part of, at least for us, feeling successful, even though personally, individually, maybe we're not literally successful. Part of how we might feel successful is being part of a team, being a part of something greater. Being part of a marriage, being part of a family, being part of a community, being part of a church that's winning in some way, in some form, as we understand it. Part of the lesson we're called to learn or remember, of course, is just keep going. But the other lesson we're to learn is to stay on the team. And remember, we can't go at it alone. It's the team's job to get us home. Success through persistence means working with and being with others, sharing life together for the long run. I've got a group of guys that I've met with for years. It's coming up on 20 years, I think. And we used to be able to eat breakfast together when we lived closer, but now it's been online every Thursday for a long time. And occasionally, as guys, we will share affectionate things with one another, but we're kind of guys too, so it doesn't happen a lot. But it was just a couple weeks ago, one of us said, guys, I don't know if I'd be in ministry without you all. And then we each took turns kind of sharing the same sentiment. That, all of us in that group, we all have success stories and we all have a lot of baggage. And we kind of had to admit it was a really powerful, true moment where we said, I don't know that I'd stay in this deal if you hadn't been there. And we all could say that it's so important. It's the team that gets you home. Sure, it's great when our spirituality or whatever is awesome and we're hitting that home run. I mean, hey, that's fun, right? But we got to remember we have to have each other, and really all we're called to do is just our part. We can't win. We need to remember we can't win slugging away on our own. The great news is, even if we're in a slump, as long as we're part of the team, we're going to win. When I think of these promises of Scripture, that God is with us, that we can be strong and of good courage and not be afraid despite our circumstances, despite the failing of our physical bodies, despite our relationships often being broken or in need of serious repair, despite our dreams maybe not being fulfilled, no matter wherever we go, no matter whatever happened, that in fact God is with us. I think God's team, the church, is what helps us remember this, and not just from sermons. Sermons are nothing. It's real flesh and blood that takes on the promises of God. That the promises of God become incarnate. You feel God is with you because your brothers and sisters remind you, and they're with you. You feel because you're part of this group or that group, or this person or that person, whether it's physically in this church or believers otherwise that are in your family that encourage you. But I hope it's people in here too. We got to keep working on that because that's part of what what it means to be on a team, and part of what the idea is about being church, God being with us. And that we are reminded, not just in words of a sermon, but through real people who fulfill those promises, encouraging us and being with us and being champions for us. I mean, when I have my friends, when I have you, when others in my life have stepped up and been listening ears and provided good counsel and encouragement and prayed with me, and I feel these promises are true. It's in those times when I'm with others, the team. That's when my fear dissipates within me and my strength returns and hope is regained, and I know God is with me. Those feelings don't last. I have to keep relying on the team to get me home. Let me tell you a final story about a young man I knew. A true story. His name was Spencer, and when I knew this kid, he joined the baseball team, and everybody on the team, the other players, the coaches, they all knew that he didn't have the talent that the other boys had. He was slow, he was overweight, didn't have a very strong arm, but he worked hard. He had a great attitude. He was positive, energetic, open to learning, being helped. Others would have given up, though, if they were in his shoes. Others did give up over the course of time when I saw this kid play, but he didn't. In fact, there were times when the team that he was on would have 2 or 3 games on a single day, and he'd still manage to work on some technique or practice somehow in between those games. Great attitude. Can you imagine how devastating it was for him, despite having such a great attitude, that his junior year of high school, they cut him from the team? It was hard. So that's when he quit, right? No, he kept working. Success through persistence. So softball players, baseball players, they learn to navigate failure well. They don't even see it as failure anymore. They just look for the next opportunity. Spencer did, and that next year, his senior year, he made the team. And he actually went on to play college ball. And that's when the story changes, right? That's when all of a sudden he becomes a star, success at every corner. No, actually not. Spencer still struggled. He struggled in college ball. He nonetheless stayed on the team, and he did play. Turns out, part of the team and the way they appreciated him, the way he learned his role in the team, was that he was a really good teammate. In fact, as it came out, he was one of the best encouragers to other players. I mean, no wonder, right? A kid that had been through so many negative things, overcome so many obstacles, he knew firsthand how important it was to encourage others, to help them, to be there for them. And I think that's part of the reason why when he got done with college, Spencer thought, I think God's calling me to be a pastor. Spencer, through his struggles, he experienced a different kind of success. The success of helping others find theirs, or at least the success of just helping others. You can be a success by helping others. You can be a success by helping others find theirs, or just helping them, period. You're successful when your spouse is. You're successful when the office is. You are successful when your children are. You are successful when your church is. You are successful by just keep going. You are successful when you learn that it's the team's job to get you home. You're successful when you learn success sometimes, maybe more than sometimes, is about helping others find theirs. It's a hard thing for many of us to accept, but the truth is most of life doesn't work out for us, although we want it to. Some things we accomplish, but other things we don't. We get some of what we want, but an awful lot seems to get left behind. Ultimately, we might decide that those things that get left behind weren't all that important anyway, or we find some other way to cope with that loss. Still, life can be filled with incredible amounts of failure if we look at it that way. Oftentimes, our question is, how do I avoid that? But what if instead the question was, how do I navigate through it? Because that's just the way it is. Maybe even the question could be, how do I see these things no longer as failures? How much of all of this do you think might depend on whether or not you decide to play on the team God has created and given us and asked us to be teammates on, the church? Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Casey Stengel, he was famous, of course, for those 1950 Yankees. But what a lot of people don't know is that after he stopped playing as a professional baseball player himself, he was a right fielder, he started managing right away. And for like almost 20 years, he was a failure. In fact, he did so poorly as a manager, they sent him down to the minor leagues. He was a manager in the minor leagues when the Yankees picked him up in 1949. And of course, they went on to do all that they did. And that's, remember old Paul Harvey? Some of us remember Paul Harvey. The rest of the story, right? If you don't remember that, don't worry about it. Ask your grandpa or something. But the other part of Casey Stengel's story doesn't end with the Yankees. In 1960, they went to the World Series and they lost, and he got fired. He got fired pretty much for just being old, to be honest. And there was an opportunity, though, right? Navigating failure, success through persistence. There's an opportunity for a brand new expansion team, the New York Mets. And so he started managing the New York Mets, and they were terrible. They were awful, but it didn't matter to Casey. He started being their promoter too. He would call them the Amazing Mets. You got to come out and see the Amazing Mets. I'm telling you, the Amazing Mets. And nobody did because they were awful. In fact, at one point he said, the Mets are teaching me new ways I never knew you could lose. In 1964, 65, I can't remember, Casey had a fall. Something happened, like he broke his hip, I think. He ended up moving out to California, and the team let him go as manager. I think officially they called him a vice president, but he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything for the team. Fast forward, 1969. You remember what happened that year? There were a whole lot more people calling them the Amazing Mets. In fact, they called them the Miracle Mets, because that year they won the World Series. They beat the Orioles. And at the end of Game 5, when they won, Casey was down in the locker room with the rest of the team. And they gave him a World Series ring too. They understood that getting to where they did involved all those years of failing. In fact, I don't think they saw it as failing at all. It was just playing the game and keep going, knowing that it's the team that'll bring you home. And sometimes success ends up looking a little different than what you first thought.